When Pam Bondi ends up in a courtroom after getting sued by an anti-Trump Karen neighbor for playing music loud. In the court, the Democrat judge starts swearing at her, and she then proves she is a legal genius. The sun hung low over the manicured lawns of Palm Beach, Florida, on March 23, 2025, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as it dipped toward the horizon. Long shadows stretched across the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Seaview Estates, where the former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi had recently settled into what she hoped would be a well-earned semi-retirement. The air carried the faint tang of salt from the nearby Atlantic Ocean, a breeze rustling the fronds of towering palm trees that lined the streets. It was a serene scene, one that promised relaxation and respite after decades of high-stakes legal battles and political warfare. Bondi, at 59, stood in her backyard, a glass of iced tea in hand, adjusting the volume on her sleek outdoor speakers. The smooth, nostalgic strains of classic rock, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, drifted across the meticulously trimmed grass, mingling with the distant crash of waves. She'd spent years fighting for justice in courtrooms and statehouses, prosecuting criminals and navigating the treacherous waters of Florida politics. Now, she thought, it was time to enjoy the fruits of her labor, to savor the simple pleasures of a quiet life. Or so she thought. Next door, however, trouble was brewing. Karen Witherspoon, a self-proclaimed progressive warrior who'd relocated to Florida 3 years prior to escape what she called Trump country up north, was not having it. Karen, a wiry woman in her late 40s with a perpetually pinched expression etched into her angular face, had spent the last 6 months stewing over Bondi's very existence in the neighborhood. She'd moved to Palm Beach from Massachusetts, lured by the promise of warm weather and a fresh start, but she'd brought with her a simmering resentment for anything or anyone she deemed too conservative for her tastes. Karen's small modern bungalow with its solar panels and coexist bumper sticker on her Prius stood in stark contrast to Bondi's sprawling traditional home, complete with its wraparound porch and neatly trimmed hedges. The first strike against Bondi in Karen's mind had come months earlier during a delivery mix-up. A package meant for Karen had been dropped at Bondi's doorstep by mistake, and when Karen marched over to retrieve it, she'd caught a glimpse inside Bondi's garage. There, hanging on a pegboard next to a set of golf clubs, were 2 bright red MAGA hats, their bold white lettering practically glowing in the dim light. Karen had frozen, her lips pursing into a thin line as her mind raced. A Trump supporter? Here? In my neighborhood? She'd snatched her package and stormed back home without a word. But the image of those hats had seared itself into her brain, festering like an open wound. Strike 2 came a few weeks later when Bondi raised an American flag on a polished pole in her front yard. It wasn't just any flag. It was a full-sized, crisp stars and stripes, fluttering proudly in the ocean breeze. To Bondi, it was a symbol of her love for her country, a quiet nod to the values she'd defended throughout her career. To Karen, it was a provocation, a dog whistle to every right-wing extremist she'd spent her life railing against on social media. She'd stood at her kitchen window, arms crossed, watching the flag snap in the wind, muttering to herself, "She's taunting me. She knows I'm here." But the music? That was the final straw. For weeks, Karen had tolerated the faint hum of Bondi's outdoor speakers, the occasional guitar riff or drum beat floating over the privacy fence that separated their properties. She'd tried to ignore it, drowning it out with her own playlist of folk protest songs and NPR podcasts. But on this particular evening, as the sun sank lower and Bondi cranked up the volume just a touch, still well within the legal limit, Karen snapped. The sound of "Sweet Home Alabama" wafted through her open window, and something inside her broke. "I can't take it anymore," Karen shrieked into her phone, pacing her kitchen like a caged animal as she dialed the local police for the 3rd time that month. Her voice, shrill and trembling with indignation, echoed off the stainless steel appliances and the framed photo of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on her wall. "She's blasting that right-wing noise pollution again. I deserve peace in my own home, and that Trump-loving fascist is ruining it." On the other end of the line, the dispatcher, a weary woman named Carla who'd fielded Karen's calls before, sighed audibly, rubbing her temples. Karen's complaints had become a neighborhood legend, a running joke among the Palm Beach PD. "Ma'am," Carla said, her tone flat, "we'll send an officer to check it out. Again." But Karen wasn't satisfied with that. She slammed the phone down on the counter, her hands shaking with rage, and grabbed her laptop from the kitchen table. Her fingers flew across the keys as she fired off a furious email to her lawyer, a scrappy young attorney named Greg Hensley she'd met at a local Democratic fundraiser. "Sue her," she typed, her words punctuated by furious jabs at the keyboard. "I want her punished. I want her silenced." Meanwhile, Pam Bondi stood in her backyard, oblivious to the storm brewing next door. She took a sip of her iced tea, the condensation dripping onto her fingers, and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her. The song switched to Hotel California, the haunting guitar intro filling the air. She smiled faintly, remembering the long nights in her Tallahassee office poring over case files with classic rock playing softly in the background. This was her sanctuary now, a place where she could finally breathe, away from the chaos of politics in the courtroom. She'd faced down murderers, corrupt officials, and hostile media over the years, always with a steely resolve and a sharp legal mind. A little neighborhood friction? That was nothing she couldn't handle, or so she assumed. 2 weeks later, the serenity of that evening was a distant memory as Bondi found herself standing in the Palm Beach County Courthouse, her navy blazer crisp and her blonde hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She carried a slim leather briefcase, its contents meticulously organized, and her expression was one of calm determination. Across from her at the plaintiff's table sat Karen Witherspoon, armed with a decibel meter app on her phone, and a stack of exaggerated affidavits from sympathetic friends, fellow members of her book club who'd agreed to swear Bondi's music had ruined their lives too. Karen's demands were clear: $50,000 in damages for noise nuisance and emotional distress, plus a court order banning Bondi from ever playing music outdoors again. Her pinched face was set in a triumphant smirk as she whispered to Greg Hensley, who nodded eagerly, smoothing his ponytail with a practiced hand. The courthouse itself was a grand, imposing structure, its white stucco walls and red-tiled roof, a nod to Florida's Spanish colonial past. Inside, the air was cool and hushed, the hum of the air conditioning mingling with the murmur of voices from attorneys, clerks, and spectators. The courtroom assigned to the case, Room 3B, was already filling up as Bondi took her seat at the defense table. Locals had caught wind of the showdown, and a handful of reporters from the Palm Beach Post and a local conservative blog had squeezed into the gallery, notebooks and phones at the ready. Word had spread quickly in Seaview Estates, the former AG versus the neighborhood's resident complainer. It was the kind of small-town drama that promised fireworks. What should have been a minor dispute, a petty squabble between neighbors over a few decibels, was about to spiral into a courtroom showdown that would leave the entire county talking. For Pam Bondi, it was just another day at the office, a chance to flex her legal muscles one more time. For Karen Witherspoon, it was a crusade, a righteous battle against the conservative menace next door. And for the judge about to preside over the case, a volatile Democrat named Leonard Grayson, it was an opportunity to settle an old score. The federal courthouse buzzed with the usual hum of activity as Bondi stepped into the wood-paneled courtroom of Judge Leonard Grayson, a wiry, bespectacled man in his early 60s with a reputation for sharp rulings and sharper temper. Grayson, a known Democrat with a history of progressive activism before his appointment to the bench, had spent years quietly seething over Florida's conservative tilt. Today, his mood was fouler than usual. "No goddamn coffee in my courtroom," Grayson bellowed at his clerk, a nervous young woman named Emily who nearly dropped her files in her haste to comply. "And tell that defense attorney if she's not here in 30 seconds, I'll hold her in contempt before she even opens her mouth." The packed gallery, filled with curious locals, a few reporters, and Karen's small posse of supporters, shifted uncomfortably as Grayson stormed to his bench, his black robes flapping like a vulture's wings. Bondi entered with her trademark poise, her blonde hair neatly pulled back, her navy suit crisp and professional. She carried a slim leather briefcase and offered a polite nod to the court staff, unfazed by the judge's theatrics. Karen, seated at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, a slick, ponytailed man named Greg Hensley, glared daggers at Bondi, clutching a tissue as if she were on the verge of a breakdown. Grayson's eyes narrowed as he spotted Bondi. "Well, well, if it isn't the great Pam Bondi," he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Florida's former top cop gracing my courtroom over a noise complaint. What a fucking fall from grace." The gallery gasped at the judge's profanity, but Grayson didn't flinch. "Let's get one thing straight, Ms. Bondi. I don't give a shit about your political connections or your fancy titles. In here, I'm the law. Got it?" Bondi met his gaze evenly, her voice calm but firm. "Understood, Your Honor. I'm here to defend myself and present the facts." "Facts?" Grayson snorted, leaning back in his chair. "We'll see about that. Plaintiff, let's hear your sob story." Greg Hensley stood, smoothing his tie with a practiced flourish. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Witherspoon, has endured months of relentless harassment from the defendant. Ms. Bondi's excessively loud music, often played at all hours, has caused severe emotional distress, disrupted Ms. Witherspoon's sleep, and violated local noise ordinances. We have recordings, witness statements, and decibel readings to prove it." Karen dabbed her eyes dramatically, her voice trembling as she interjected. "She's a Trump stooge. She plays that music to antagonize me because I'm a liberal. It's targeted harassment," the gallery murmured, and Grayson banged his gavel. "Order. Ms. Witherspoon, you'll speak when I tell you to. But," he shot Bondi a venomous look, "I'm inclined to believe there's some truth to that. Ms. Bondi, your response?" Bondi rose, her demeanor unshaken. "Your Honor, this case is a frivolous attempt to weaponize the court against me. I've complied with all local noise ordinances. My music never exceeds 60 decibels, well below the legal limit of 65. I have my own recordings, permits for outdoor speakers, and a survey proving my property is zoned for residential use, including reasonable enjoyment of music. Ms. Witherspoon's claims are exaggerated and baseless." Grayson's face twisted into a scowl. "Permits? Recordings? Spare me the fucking legalese, Bondi. You think you can waltz in here with your slick lawyer tricks and make this go away? This isn't Tallahassee. I don't bow to conservative bullshit." The gallery stirred again, shocked by the judge's unhinged outburst. Even Hensley looked uneasy, glancing at Karen as if to say this might be too much. But Bondi didn't blink. She'd faced worse in her career, prosecuting murderers, battling political opponents, and she knew how to handle a bully. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "I'm simply presenting evidence, as is my right. If you'd like to review the decibel logs—" "Shut the hell up," Grayson snapped, slamming his gavel so hard the wood cracked. "I don't need your logs or your excuses. I've seen your type. Rich conservatives who think the rules don't apply. You're not fooling me." The second day of the trial began with Grayson in an even darker mood. Word had spread about his outburst, and the courtroom was now packed with reporters and onlookers eager to see the fireworks. Karen took the stand, her performance Oscar-worthy as she recounted her trauma. "I'd wake up at night shaking because of that awful music," she sobbed. "It's not just noise, it's a political attack. She knows I voted for Biden." Grayson nodded sympathetically, scribbling notes. "Go on, Ms. Witherspoon. Tell me how this Trump lackey made your life hell." Bondi's attorney instincts kicked in. She stood, her voice cutting through the melodrama. "Objection, Your Honor. The plaintiff's political beliefs are irrelevant, and your comment suggests bias." Grayson's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "Bias? You've got some fucking nerve, Bondi. Sit down before I throw you out of my courtroom." But Bondi didn't sit. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a slim folder. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to submit evidence that might clarify this case and your conduct. The gallery leaned forward as Grayson's face reddened. What the hell are you talking about? Bondi held up a document. This is a transcript of a conversation you had last month with Ms. Witherspoon's attorney, Mr. Hensley, at a local Democratic fundraiser. You're quoted saying, "If Pam Bondi ever shows up in my court, I'll make her regret it." That was 3 weeks before this lawsuit was filed. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Grayson slammed his gavel repeatedly. Order. That's inadmissible. You've got no proof. Actually, Bondi continued unfazed, it's corroborated by audio from a public event, legally recorded. I also have text messages between you and Mr. Hensley discussing how to fast-track this case. Care to explain, Your Honor? Grayson's hands trembled as he shuffled papers on his desk, his eyes darting to a specific folder that seemed to materialize overnight. This is a goddamn setup. You're fabricating evidence. No, Your Honor, Bondi said, her tone icy. I'm a lawyer. I know how to build a case, and I've got more, like these bank records showing $10,000 deposited into your personal account from a PAC linked to Ms. Witherspoon's activist group, dated 2 days after this suit was filed. Karen's jaw dropped and Hensley sank into his chair. Grayson lunged forward, spittle flying. You fucking liar. I'll have you disbarred for this. Guards, remove her. The court officers hesitated, exchanging glances. Bondi pressed on, pulling out another document. And here's a pattern. 5 other cases in your courtroom where conservative defendants lost after similar deposits. Like the Miller case, where a small business owner was fined $20,000 for a minor zoning violation after you met with the same PAC. Grayson's face went from red to white. How dare you? I mean, what deposits? This is a conspiracy. Is it? Bondi asked, her voice steady. Because your own clerk, Emily, has agreed to testify about your orders to lose evidence in those cases. She's in the hallway with the FBI right now. The courtroom fell silent as the back door swung open. 3 FBI agents strode in, badges gleaming. Judge Leonard Grayson, the lead agent announced, this court is now under federal investigation. Stay where you are. Grayson shrieked, backing toward his chambers. You can't do this. I'm a judge. I have immunity. Not anymore, Bondi said, holding up one final document. Your signature on these wire transfers ties you to a broader network of judicial corruption. 7 judges, all taking payments to target conservatives. It's over. As the agents handcuffed Grayson, he turned to Bondi, his voice a snarl. You think you've won? There'll always be others. Maybe, Bondi replied. But there'll also always be people like me who fight back. That's justice, Your Honor, not your corruption. The gallery erupted in cheers as Grayson was led away. Karen's case was dismissed the next day, and Bondi returned to her backyard, cranking the music just a little louder, legally, of course. W.